At my husband's funeral, my hidden strength was revealed when my daughter-in-law mocked my dress. A sharp gasp echoed around the weathered church, followed by the low murmurs of disbelief. Susan's fingers trembled as she brushed a tear from her cheek, her simple black dress hanging heavily on her shoulders. It reminded her of Tom, of every quiet moment spent together. But now it felt like a shroud, and Jessica's voice cut through the somber atmosphere like a knife. "What's with that outdated dress, Susan? So last season." The venom in her tone sent shockwaves through the onlookers, the warmth of mourning suddenly cold. It wasn't just the dress. No, this felt like an affront to her very existence. Hadn't she spent decades clad in love and dedication, shaping her world around Tom? Now her identity was tangled up in his absence, and every comforting embrace felt tainted by whispers of inadequacy. Suddenly, it wasn't just grief gnawing at her. It was a raw anger, a desperate urge to fight back. But how? She felt lost in her sorrow, the weight of financial uncertainty pressing down on her chest. Her two sons stood by, teetering on the tightrope of family loyalties and their wives' social ambitions, leaving Susan feeling isolated in her grief. As she took a deep breath, the aroma of the church's wooden pews mixed with floral scent flooded her senses, anchoring her momentarily. But Jessica's cutting remark lingered, embedding itself into her thoughts like a splinter. How could she reclaim her sense of purpose when her past weighed her down? Walking back to the car, she felt the flickering flame of creativity spark within. Painting, storytelling. They were once the very essence of who she was, now buried beneath the clouds of associative loss. Susan found her way to the quaint art gallery in town, a place where brushstrokes turned emotions into tangible reality. It felt foreign and yet familiar, a canvas waiting for her to smudge her grief onto it. She began to paint again after years of silence, capturing her love, her despair, and pain in vivid colors. Each stroke was a piece of her soul unearthing itself, yearning to emerge from a shadowed existence. As the gallery show approached, excitement mixed dread in her stomach. That wretched little voice echoed in her mind, chipping away at her self-worth. Could she really showcase her work? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As opening day approached, whispers of anticipation mingled with anxiety. Jessica's smirk haunted her, ready to pounce, ready to belittle her all over again. "Your art doesn't belong here, Susan," she'd say, and that twisted knot inside her would tighten. But this was for Tom. It had to be worth something, didn't it? With each passing minute, self-doubt swirled, clawing at her resolve. Could she stand in the light, shoulder her way into a conversation that could change everything, and still keep her fragmented family intact? The prospect of confrontation loomed large, threatening the fragile sense of empowerment she had barely grasped. She inhaled deeply, the scent of oil paint and possibility saturating the air, a preamble to the battle she never signed up for. Would she fold under pressure, or finally stretch her wings? The answer felt perilously close. The day of the gallery show dawned, the sun filtering through the overhead clouds like illuminating whispers. Susan stood in front of her collection, each canvas reflecting different shades of emotion, unique fragments of her life with Tom. She had opted for a vibrant scarf, defiantly bright against her black dress, to adorn her model of artistry amidst grief. It symbolized a newfound resilience, a quiet rebellion against the comments that threatened to strip her of that fragile empowerment. As the crowd trickled in, waves of familiar faces washed over her. Friends, acquaintances, and even the occasional stranger whose gaze lingered too long. With each smile, each nod of appreciation, she drew strength. Yet the specter of Jessica loomed just beyond the bright lights. The anticipation of confrontation fluttered in her chest. Would Jessica show? And if she did, could she endure another barb aimed to her artistic soul? Susan took a moment to breathe, letting the rich scent of turpentine and oil paint envelop her. In the stillness, her mind flitted to the reasons she had created each piece. The canvas depicting a sunset reminded her of Tom's laughter as they watched the day fade. The wildflowers in another mirrored their long walks in the meadows. "You can't just hide in your memories," she whispered to herself. It was a mantra she needed, an assertion that building upon her past was a path forward. People began to gather around her paintings, murmuring praises. She caught snippets of genuine admiration that lifted her spirits. What a compelling narrative, such emotion in the brushwork. They didn't know how healing each stroke had been, nor how deeply she had fought to reclaim parts of herself. But the echo of doubt was still there, lurking in the corners of her mind like a persistent shadow. Then, without warning, Jessica entered. The room seemed to contract around Susan, whose heart raced in sync with her rising cortisol. Jessica's gaze swept over the canvases with an exaggerated arched eyebrow, the corner of her mouth curving into a derisive sneer. "Oh, look at you, Susan, trying to be, what, an artist?" Her voice dripped with condescension, drawing the eyes of the crowd toward them. The air thickened, spectators caught in a web of tense silence. In that moment, Susan felt time pause. She could either allow Jessica's words to tear apart her newly woven cloak of confidence or confront the remnants of her buried strength. The memory of Tom's unconditional support loomed like a bittersweet anchor in her resolve. He had always believed in her talent, urging her to explore the depths of her creativity. She could feel that encouragement swelling within her like a tide waiting to crash. Gathering her courage, she stepped forward. "Art is subjective, Jessica. Perhaps it's time to embrace something new rather than mock what you don't understand." Her words, though steady, resonated with an edge of defiance. A subtle gasp rippled through the crowd. Some looked astonished, others admired her backbone. Eyes flitted between the two women, their anticipation palpable. Jessica faltered, the smirk faltering momentarily, replaced by incredulous shock. But Susan wasn't finished. "This isn't just about the art, it's about reclaiming my voice, my life. You might dismiss my passion as trivial, but it's my strength in the face of everything." Her heart pounded, adrenaline coursing through her veins, igniting something fierce and unyielding within. The moment held a clarity she had never experienced before, a fortitude born from defiance against both grief and Jessica's scorn. As quiet murmurs filled the space once more, Susan turned away, eyes on her artwork, the pieces of her soul laid bare for the world. Each one was a testament to her journey, a reminder that she could stand tall amidst condescension and intolerance. But just as she felt the rush of exhilaration, she caught Jessica whispering to a friend, "This won't last, just a phase." The sting of the statement pierced through her newfound strength, raising questions about the fragility of her journey. Could this affirmation hold court against a woman ready to undermine her at every turn? The road ahead was uncertain. Could she sustain the high of this moment, or would Jessica's shadows threaten to wrap around her dreams? The echoes of doubt threatened to surface once more, and the walls felt like they were closing in. Deep breaths didn't soothe the tremor coursing through her veins. The confrontation had merely begun. Would she continue to rise against the challenges, or would she succumb to the roles that had defined her before? The answer lingered just out of reach, waiting for the defining moment when she would have to face it directly. As the evening unfolded, Susan drifted through the gallery, the energy of the crowd both invigorating and overwhelming. Each compliment threaded through her like a delicate stitch, binding her insecurities, but also exposing the frayed edges. She reminded herself of Tom, who always embraced her passion with radiant enthusiasm. This was supposed to be a moment of empowerment, Yet Jessica's cutting remarks lingered in the air like an unwelcome perfume. Feeling the weight of her heart in her throat, Susan moved away from the center of attention, seeking solace in a nearby alcove where a single canvas shone under the warm lights. This one showed a tempestuous sea, with waves crashing violently against a forlorn cliff, a visual echo of her inner storm. It was where she allowed emotions, dark and turbulent, to be set free. For a moment, the loneliness swelled around her, but she knew this was her path. She took a deep breath and began to analyze her journey. The gallery had been a showcase not just of her art, but of her tenacity. Confronting Jessica stirred something deeper than mere defiance. It kindled the understanding that each brushstroke held a battle won. Gradually solidifying her identity, she realized that she wasn't merely reacting to threats. She was actively choosing resilience. Still shaken by the memory of Jessica's mockery, Susan closed her eyes. What sparked her passion hadn't just been loss. It was her inherent creativity that breathed life into her disillusionment. Each painting represented a bridge over despair, a way to feed her spirit rather than drown it. At that moment, she resolved to transform the weight of criticism into fuel for her artistic fire. As she opened her eyes, a familiar voice broke through her reverie. "Are you all right?" It was Nora, an old friend and fellow artist, with an understanding look in her eyes. Susan had always admired Nora's capacity to confront challenges with grace. Susan felt a pull of vulnerability at sharing this moment, but as she opened her mouth to speak, she saw the kindness reflected in Nora's gaze and felt compelled to share her fears. "I'm not sure if I can keep this up," she admitted, vulnerability painted in each word. Jessica's words, they cut deeper than I want to admit. What if this is just a phase? What if I can't sustain this sense of purpose? Nora took a breath, leaning in closer, her voice a steadying beacon. "You're not seeking validation from anyone else, Susan. This journey is yours alone. Art is an expression of your deepest self, and it's born from your strength. Use her doubt as a measure of your commitment. Transform it into conviction. Capitalize on the uncertainties. Art doesn't have to please everyone. It has to speak your truth." Those words hung in the air, sparking something within Susan. The moment transformed from one of despair to empowerment. Her canvas was not just a reflection of pain, but of rebirth. Invoking strength, refusing to conform to the whims of criticism. As the night wore on, the crowd's admiration began to feel less like a necessity for validation, but more like affirmation of her inner truth. Conversations flowed easily, brimming with excitement about future exhibitions and artistic collaborations. Each connection cemented her realization. She belonged, not because she needed approval, but because she was passionate about sharing her world, colors and all. The confidence she began to build was exhilarating. Yet, as Susan chatted with fellow artists, her gaze drifted back to Jessica, who was conversating with others, a sly smile plastered on her face. The dread stirred in her, threatening to unravel her newfound momentum. It was only a moment, but the silence of concern fell over her heart. Would her determination withstand that impending confrontation? The looming specter of Jessica felt omnipresent, and for an instant, doubt wrapped around her resolve like a dark shroud. Suddenly, a thought ignited within her, a spark that was both frightening and exhilarating. She could confront Jessica again, draw her strength from what her art represented. Would she muster the courage to defend herself and her creativity once more? The answer eluded Susan, pumping adrenaline through her veins. The anticipation of a new confrontation loomed just ahead, demanding her to choose courage over fear. The moment had come to solidify her journey, and she felt ready for what lay ahead. Would she channel her passion into a decisive step, or would she let doubt redraw the lines she had fought so hard to reshape? As the bittersweet glow of the gallery lights flickered around her, Susan felt an undercurrent of determination swell within. The alluring hum of conversations provided a backdrop to her conscious choice, urging her forward. She wasn't merely a bystander in her own life anymore. She was a participant, a creator, shaping the very essence of her experience through paint and passion. With each deliberate step she took toward Jessica, the festival atmosphere faded into a blur. The whispers and laughter around her transformed into a faint echo, while her heart pounded with an urgency that felt unparalleled. This wasn't just about confronting an antagonist. It was about asserting her identity, affirming the culmination of her artistic journey, a path rife with personal trials and triumphs. As she approached, Susan observed Jessica's posture, relaxed and confident, still enveloped in her own fabricated enchantment. The unwanted memories of past criticisms threatened to seep into her consciousness, but she anchored herself in the truth of Nora's words. Tremors of fear coursed through her veins, and doubt flickered like a candle threatened by the wind. Were Jessica's judgments valid in her eyes? "Can I talk to you for a moment?" Susan's voice came out firmer than she anticipated, cutting through the repartee. Jessica's surprise morphed into uncertainty, an imperceptible crack appearing in her composed facade. "What's this about?" Jessica's tone dripped with feigned curiosity, but Susan detected the hint of apprehension lying beneath. "I need to address something that's been bothering me. Your comments about my work," she began, feeling the words push through her clenched throat. "You may think you're higher up in the art world, but your snide remarks don't define my talent or my passion. I create for myself, not for acceptance. You've underestimated me." A pause followed her assertive statement, stretching into a silence heavy with tension. The murmurs of nearby conversations dimmed further as attendees sensed the charged atmosphere, shifting their attention towards the unfolding confrontation. Susan's heart raced, her initial trepidation blurring into a profound sense of empowerment. Jessica's earlier bravado faltered momentarily. Her eyes narrowed, a challenge igniting in their depths. "You truly believe sarcasm means I'm threatened by you?" "I don't need to waste my energy on you. This is simply how the industry is. You need to toughen up if you plan to survive." The dismissive tone stung, but it built a fire within Susan that couldn't be extinguished. The thought of yielding to the same whispers that had haunted her for years was incapacitating. "It's not about survival," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "It's about authenticity. My art is about my truth, channeling my experiences, even the painful ones. If being vulnerable and passionate is seen as weak, then I'll proudly wear that so-called weakness." Conference goers shifted their attention, a muted wave of empathy rolling through the audience. Susan felt the warmth of shared acknowledgement, and although Jessica remained still, square-jawed and defensive, the crowd buzzed with newfound respect for Susan's resilience. With each moment of this confrontation, this revelation, she unearthed her confidence, the resolute understanding of her worth solidifying within her spirit. And suddenly, under the scrutiny of so many watchful eyes, Susan transformed the role of the artist. She became the architect of her own narrative, unafraid to explore her vulnerabilities. "Maybe your opinions show more about your vulnerabilities than mine," she said, the words unleashed with newfound clarity. "And if doubt has defined you, then take it from me. There's bravery in breaking that mold." The air shifted again, this time charged with a sense of evolution. Jessica's eyes flickered, and in that moment, Susan saw a fracture in her armor. The confrontation ignited a subtle realization. Susan was not weak, she was fierce, created anew through her artistry and the bonds forged in shared experiences. Yet as the initial shock wore off, a heavy silence fell. The patrons, now uncertain of how Jessica would respond, seemed ready for an outbreak, as if they held the breath of the night itself. Susan sensed the lingering tension, thrilled yet wary. Would Jessica retaliate? Was this the night Susan would truly reclaim her narrative? Or was the confrontation merely a prelude to a deeper conflict? The answer loomed in the delicate murmur of uncertainty that followed her words, and Susan realized that the next chapter of her journey had already begun. With her heart pounding, she braced for the response that would determine not just her evening's fate, but the very contours of her artistic evolution. The silence felt suffocating, heavy with unspoken words and the weight of anticipation. Jessica's posture shifted, an armor of confidence beginning to slip as she processed Susan's bold declaration. The once engaging chatter of the crowd faded into a distant murmur, replaced by the palpable tension between them, each heartbeat marking the pulse of Susan's resolve. "Are you seriously going to stand here and act like a victim?" Jessica finally retorted, her bravado trembling, edges fraying. "Newsflash, Susan, vulnerability doesn't win shows or accolades. You think people admire you for being authentic? They're going to eat you alive, and I won't feel sorry for you when it happens." The jab landed with a stinging force, but instead of shrinking away, Susan straightened her posture, a fierce determination igniting her resolve. It was clear now. Jessica's venomous words stemmed from her own insecurities. Choosing to embrace her own vulnerability was no longer a notion up for debate. It had become her lifeline, a source of creativity and strength. "Maybe it's time you reflect on what truly drives your need to belittle others," Susan spoke, her voice steady. Each word was no longer just a rebuttal, but a stepping stone in her emerging personal narrative. Finding worth in the struggle, the pain, that's precisely what art is about. It's not all praise and accolades. It's raw, it's layered, and it's human. The crowd, now electric with intensity, shifted, drawing closer to witness the deepening exchange. The angles of their faces were soft with empathy, curiosity intermingling with disbelief, as they bore witness to this unexpected transformation. Susan could feel the eyes lingering, recognizing the power of transformation right before her. Jessica's facade cracked further. The defiance melted away, replaced by an almost palpable air of desperation. "You think you can redefine the narrative?" she sneered, though her voice quaked with uncertainty. "You think the art world will embrace the likes of you?" "Yes, I do," Susan asserted boldly, surprising herself with the conviction soaring through her chest. The fire lit within her intensified as she recognized the truth in those words. Her journey had prepared her for this moment, and it wasn't just for herself, it was for others like her. "And I'm going to create space for all of us, whoever we are, whatever we bring." Authenticity breeds connection, and that's what makes art powerful. It isn't about proving worth, it's about sharing experiences. A flicker of admiration rippled through the crowd, a soft chorus affirming her voice. She sensed an unspoken agreement binding the onlookers. Fellow creators sharing the weight of societal judgment felt through Jessica's pinpointed derision. The dynamic shifted, pulling Susan through the pivotal threshold of acceptance and self-advocacy. Jessica, braced for a countermove, faltered. The challenge waned as realization settled within her, an understanding of her own defensiveness becoming clear. There was no longer any room left for denial. She had become the outcast to her former self, undermined by the strength she had tried to impose on others. "What do you have to lose then?" Jessica withdrew, contemplative but defensive. "You'll never make it if you keep that mentality." Susan felt a swell of exhilaration. "You're right, I have to let go of the fear of losing," she replied, tasting the freedom in her words as if they were newly painted strokes on a canvas yet to be revealed. A spark glimmered in the eyes of nearby artists, expressions morphing from apprehension to courage as the air buzzed with possibility. Turning her gaze away from Jessica, Susan felt the deep affirmation of purpose sweep over her. She was part of something greater than herself, rewriting the script anew, firm in her belief of shared journeys. Through art. Yet just as the tide seemed to shift, a sharp voice interrupted, breaking through the hope that hung in the air. "But what if you fail?" It was a hushed whisper from the back, as if an unseen hand pressed down, adding pressure to the fragile moment. "Failure won't define me. My resilience will," Susan shot back, instantaneously addressing the question that hovered, heavy and lingering. The battle was far from over, but she had ignited a fire beneath her resilience, a tenacity that awaited any challenge with fervor. As the tension echoed around her, a thrilling realization dawned. If her success depended not on accolades, but on honest connections, then the real question wasn't whether she would succeed, but whether she was brave enough to keep painting her truth. And as she stood in the center of the fray, poised to capture the moment, the weight of the next chapter beckoned. Could she truly uphold this newfound strength in a world intent on bringing her down? The artistic journey ahead looms large, filled with uncertainties that awaited her bold brushstrokes. Susan felt a rush of heat rise to her cheeks, the challenge igniting a realm of possibilities within her. She sensed an invisible barrier breaking, but doubt crept in, a flickering shadow at the edges of her newfound boldness. The question lingering in the air, what if she failed, loomed ominously. Instinctively, Susan's mind raced with calculations, plots of her future, and the whispers of doubt that threatened to eclipse the light she had just claimed. She brushed a hand through her hair, whispering silent affirmations to ground herself. Facing Jessica had felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering towards something terrifying yet exhilarating. What did it mean to really embrace her vulnerability, to allow it to guide her journey in the unforgiving landscape of the art world? Could embracing her truth actually cultivate strength? With renewed resolve, she turned her back on the throbbing uncertainty of Jessica's previous taunts and the doubt that threatened to seep into her psyche. Instead, she redirected her focus to what she had learned. Authenticity could be a bridge, connecting her to others. Wading through the remnants of the crowd, she found herself gravitating toward her workspace, filled with canvases, brushes, unrefined materials, the vast embodiment of her artistic ambitions. The chaos of thoughts began to clear. Each blank canvas begged for new stories to be told, new colors to be splashed recklessly, unrestricted by fear. She reached for a paintbrush, immersing herself in the act of creation. Yet, while focused on her task, Susan couldn't ignore the whispers of doubt that echoed in the recesses of her mind, resurrected by the intensity of her confrontation with Jessica. Choosing to embrace vulnerability had altered her perception of herself, but was she really prepared to endure more confrontations ahead? The weight of potential rejection loomed large, a constant reminder in a creative landscape riddled with judgment. She squeezed the brush in her hand gingerly, letting the vibrant blue paint contest onto the waiting canvas, imbuing the surface with life. Each stroke felt cathartic, a blend of her fears and ambitions pooling into something cohesive. The mantra of resilience resounded across the drips of paint. It wasn't enough to simply create, it was about breaking societal molds that had long enforced silence on artists like her. As hours passed, a symphony of colors began to emerge, intertwined with emotion. A deep red ignited across the palette, distracting her and drawing her eyes. It reminded her of anger, the fire she felt in contrast to the severe weight of doubt that had paralyzed her. She paused, locking eyes with the crimson hue, contemplating its significance. Anger could harness her strength, but was she ready to redirect that energy toward art? A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. It was Lily, her friend and fellow artist, beaming with an expression of admiration at Susan's blossoming creation. "Wow, Susan, this is incredible!" The excitement carved a lift in the heaviness surrounding Susan. Lily stepped closer, eyes sparkling as they glided over the vibrant strokes and lines spiraling through the canvas. "You poured your soul into this, didn't you? This is you emerging." The simple validation sparked a shift in Susan's psyche. She began to articulate her artistic philosophy, weaving words through her anxiety, a thread of discovery weaving itself through her thoughts. "I realized I can transform my struggles into art," she explained, surging with clarity. Each revelation sharpened her vision. The question of failure shifted form, reframing itself not as the end of her journey, but as a part of the revolutionary process. As Lily reminded Susan that validation is not merely external, but can also come from the self, Susan felt momentarily at peace. They exchanged ideas, fueling her passion with the fire of shared experiences. But beneath the surface, the underlying question remained: what was waiting for her beyond the bounds of this moment? Could she truly sustain this momentum? The evening slowly faded, and with it, Susan felt the weight of her challenge beckoning her still. As the realization sunk in that she needed to confront Jessica again, that the dialogue was far from over, Susan took a deep breath. The moment of truth arrived, and she envisioned herself standing boldly before Jessica once more, determined to redefine the narrative. Would she have the courage to embrace all parts of herself, even when doubt clung to her? Caught in the uncertainty of what lay ahead, she brushed the final strokes of paint and stood back to admire her work, triumphant yet apprehensive. The individual's journey hadn't concluded. Instead, it was on the cusp of ultimate exploration. As her next challenge awaited, she couldn't help but wonder, what would it take to truly exhibit her identity, her art, and the stories intertwined in every brushstroke? As dawn broke, the sun filtering through her studio windows wrapped Susan in a warm embrace, but doubt lingered like an unwelcome guest. She stared at her latest canvas, the colors vibrant yet chaotic, a reflection of her conflicting emotions. A new day meant new opportunities, yet the prospect of facing Jessica gnawed at her stomach. The confrontation was inevitable. The question was how she would conduct it. Could she confront her old fears while defending the artistic identity she was just beginning to discover? Despite the soothing morning light, Susan's mind raced. Each brushstroke from the previous night felt scratched with hesitance and hope. She whispered promises to herself. Today, she would affirm her worth as an artist. Today, she would stand firm in her artistry, regardless of Jessica's judgment. The internal battle sobered her excitement, and she knew she could not merely brush away the doubt. It required confrontation, but confrontation demanded courage she wasn't sure she possessed. With a shaky breath, she began prepping for an upcoming showcase where she planned to unveil her story, 1 week away. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. A showcase could reclaim her voice, conduct an orchestra of emotion amidst a sea of critical eyes. Yet, the looming presence of Jessica haunted her. What if her nemesis soured the unveiling and turned an opportunity for empowerment into an episode of ridicule? As she arranged her canvases, Susan's hand brushed against her old sketchbook, a forgotten companion filled with half-finished pieces, shaky sketches, and discarded ideas. A surge of fondness flooded in, her sketches radiating a raw honesty she'd once ignored. Perhaps there lay her answer, nestled within the pages, a reminder of her core self before judgment fragmented her confidence. She opened it, flipping through pages that chronicled her evolution. Each sketch told a different story, an unrelenting testament to her resilience. A pattern emerged, illuminating her path forward. She was not meant to depict perfection, but rather the messiness of emotion, of life itself. She swore to embrace that multiplicity, her flaws and triumphs dancing together on canvas and in dialogue. It was time to showcase not just her paintings, but her very self, the intricacies, fears, and dreams woven into every choice. As she gathered her artwork that afternoon, determination electrified her fingertips. The humming focus transformed her space from a site of anxiety into a sanctuary of strength. The walls adorned with her most vulnerable pieces emanated the pulse of her journey. She realized that confrontation might not stem from words alone. It might evolve through the narratives she chose to share. Even as adrenaline coursed through her, doubt snaked back into her mind. Would anyone see her worth? Would Jessica? Perhaps she craved that validation, but Susan was ready to redefine it. No longer seeking assurance through another's approval, she vowed to cultivate an unshakable foundation within herself. When the time came to confront Jessica, it would not be an apology or even a compromise. It would be her truth, unedited and unapologetic. With that decided, the whirling uncertainty in her mind finally quieted. Stepping back, Susan surveyed her space, filled with hues of truth and experiences distilled onto canvas. The deadline loomed, yet it no longer felt like a threat. It was now a beckoning challenge. But just then, her phone chimed, flashing an unexpected message, a reminder that her gallery was hosting Jessica's new work as well. The juxtaposition sent her heart racing. Would it be an opportunity to ignite a confrontation or a distraction that might sway her focus? As she exhaled, resolve poured through her. The time had come to ignite her voice amidst the tumult. Was she ready to embrace the storm for the sake of her art? How could she transform what once held her back into a tempest of strength? Susan took a moment to breathe, anchoring herself in the present before diving back into her preparations. The message from her phone lingered in her mind like a haunting refrain. She would face Jessica soon, her artistic rival, but she couldn't allow the impending confrontation to disrupt her creative flow. The stakes were high, and the weight of her own truth pressed heavily on her shoulders. As she stood in her studio, Susan recognized the pulse of an inner strength. With her bare hands coated in paint, she reshaped her perspective with every stroke she made on the canvas. The colors began to blend like her emotions, vibrant reds for her anger, deep blues for her sadness, golden yellows for hope. Each layer represented a part of her journey, raw, undistilled, and beautifully flawed. Returning to her sketchbook, a thought struck her. Perhaps it was time to confront the emotions that had been weighing her down for far too long. She flipped to an empty page and began to jot down her thoughts, hoping to articulate the feelings she struggled to voice. With ink flowing, she wrote about her fear of judgment, the painful sting of comparison, and the reluctance that had made her hesitate at every turn. This was an exercise in reclaiming her voice. Her words served as a bridge connecting her past and present. The more she wrote, the more liberating it felt. She envisioned presenting her work not just as visual art, but as an embodiment of her narrative, showcasing each piece as a chapter of her life. Each painting would serve as a conversation with her audience, inviting them into her world, flaws and all. Later that day, an afternoon glow enveloped her studio as sunlight poured through the windows, illuminating both her finished pieces and her unfinished thoughts. It reminded her of how art reveals the beauty in vulnerability, something she had neglected in her pursuit to fit into a mold dictated by others. She picked up her brush with renewed vigor, focusing on the connection her art could foster rather than the critique it could invite. But as her energy surged, so did her anxiety about confronting Jessica. Rather than retreating into doubt, she decided to forge ahead with plans to attend that showcase. She envisioned herself there, surrounded by fellow artists and supporters, and even Jessica. The image of her nemesis brought a cascade of emotions, sparking a defiance she hadn't felt before. This was her moment, she told herself. She wouldn't let anyone, Jessica included, diminish the voice that had begun to flourish. Suiting up mentally for battle, Susan crafted a mantra: "I am my story, and it is enough." This, she resolved, would be the cornerstone of her confrontation with Jessica. No longer would she permit anyone's judgment to distort her reality or silence her truth. As the end of the week approached, excitement mixed with trepidation coursed through her veins. Susan could feel the weight of her truth ready to spill forth. Had she grown enough to stand firm, not just for herself, but to embrace her identity as an artist? The day before the showcase, she decided to visit the gallery, her heart pounding in her chest. Standing before her displayed canvases, she sensed a shift within her. There was power in approaching her art as an extension of herself. But as she turned to leave, she caught sight of Jessica strolling through the gallery's entrance. Their eyes met, a silent current of challenge sparking between them. What would she say now? Would her inner strength sustain her weighty moment of truth? Susan took a breath, ready to face the storm head-on, her narrative preparing to unfold in front of an audience keen to witness her journey. As she stepped closer, every heartbeat echoed a mantra. Tomorrow is not just a showcase, it is a reckoning. Would she finally come face to face with the fears that had plagued her, or would she find a new level of resolve, unshakable against the rising tide? Her heart raced as she stared down the hallway, feeling as if the world was narrowing around her. Each step toward Jessica felt monumental, weighty with the expectations she had crafted herself. Susan had rehearsed 100 things she could say, but now they all felt inadequate and somehow trite against the backdrop of her growing tension. The light from the gallery's exit flickered, a warning sign of the confrontation ahead. She had imagined this moment countless times, picturing an encounter where she might assert her strength. Yet here she was, grappling with an undercurrent of doubt that threatened to sweep her away. This is not just about art, she reminded herself. It's about acceptance of self. As she approached the boundary of safety, her art and the self she had begun to embrace, an unsettling thought clawed at her resolve. What if Jessica dismissed her work as amateurish, a naive interpretation of true artistry? The showcase loomed larger than ever, a cathedral of creativity where dreams were born and crushed in an instant. At that moment, Susan chose to redirect her energy. Instead of focusing on Jessica's potential disparagement, she reminded herself of her mantra, "I am my story, and it is enough." The words were more than just a shield. They were a reminder of her own journey and the myriad colors she had painted into existence. She spotted her artworks along the wall, vibrant and raw, pulsating with the emotion of her truth. With every image, Susan saw herself, her struggles, triumphs, and every instance when she had refused to succumb to the fear that had haunted her for years. No longer would she be shackled by anyone's perception. The true artistry lay not only in the canvas, but in the very act of creation itself, in the act of owning her narrative. When Jessica stepped closer, a smile playing upon her lips, Susan's instinct was to shrink away, but she fought it. Instead, she stood tall, drawing strength from the very foundation that had been built through her artistic exploration. "What do you think?" Jessica asked mockingly, tilting her head as she scrutinized one of Susan's more abstract pieces. "It's a representation of acceptance," Susan replied, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath. "Acceptance of flaws, of battles fought, and of every person who has inspired me." Jessica's brow furrowed slightly, a crack in her confident facade. This was new territory for both of them. Susan reveled in the unfolding moment, realizing that confrontation had transformed into a shared dialogue. "I didn't take you for someone who would explore," Jessica said, her tone softer, as if she were genuinely surprised. "Some might say you're a little too emotional." Susan paused, considering her response. Would she dare to dive deeper into this discussion, or duck back into guarded reassurance? Each choice flickered in her mind. Yet she remembered her mantra, the voice of her truth. "I think a certain amount of emotion adds a layer of authenticity," she countered. "It's important to infuse honesty into art. That's what connects us as human beings." Jessica's gaze shifted, almost calculating, and Susan understood a moment of truth had been unveiled, not just for herself, but for Jessica too. Perhaps Jessica's challenge was not merely about undermining Susan, but tearing down their long-constructed barriers of rivalry. As the crowd began to fill the gallery, Susan felt a swell of possibility wash over her. They had only scratched the surface of an unexpected dialogue, and she wondered if confrontation could pave the way for understanding. But before she could process this new revelation fully, she saw someone else entering, the very person she had not been prepared to confront. Would this surprise disrupt the fragile peace she had begun to forge? Or could it be the catalyst for her to solidify her newfound voice and direct her path? "Tomorrow is not just a showcase, it's a reckoning," she reminded herself anew, heart pounding again with anticipation. The night of the showcase had finally arrived, and Susan stood in front of her artwork, a vibrant tapestry of colors reflecting her journey. A journey marked by acceptance, resilience, and creative rebirth. The gallery buzzed with energy, an audience eager to engage with each brushstroke that spoke of her triumph over doubt and her reclamation of identity. Yet, amid the excitement, the familiar knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach, like a storm cloud ready to unleash torrents of scorn. In the past, Susan might have crumbled under such pressure. She had often allowed Jessica's mockery to invade her psyche, making her question her worth and intentions. But tonight was different. The transformation she had undergone fueled her courage, making her feel as if she stood not just as an artist, but as a woman of conviction. The crowd meandered through the gallery, eyes flicking between Susan's bold paintings and the whispers of admiration echoing around her. People commented on the emotional depth of her work, how authenticity leaped from the canvas, each stroke a testament to her arduous climb towards self-acceptance. For the first time, she didn't seek external validation. She felt it swell from within, the culmination of hard-earned lessons crystallizing in the form of her art. As she prepared to address the gathering crowd, Susan could feel a subtle change in the air. Jessica, armed with a sharp tongue, was not far behind, but Susan held her ground. She stepped to the forefront, heart steady, and chose this moment to speak her truth. Welcome, everyone. I'm so grateful you're here to experience this evening with me. Each piece in this gallery is a reflection of my story, my struggles, my successes, and my journey of redefinition as an artist. I've learned that vulnerability is not a weakness. It's a tremendous strength that nurtures connection, both to ourselves and to each other, she began, her voice strong and clear, echoing through the room. The crowd's rapt attention bolstered her confidence, and she continued to weave her narrative of resilience. The words flowed from her like paint mingling on a palette, rich and full of emotion. She spoke of how every brushstroke allowed her to reclaim pieces of herself she thought she had lost, how the vibrant colors were a means of playing into her authentic narrative. But then she felt it, the unmistakable gaze of Jessica, dark and calculating, as if sizing her up for a challenge. And it was time. The confrontation was inevitable. As Jessica stepped forward, the murmurs in the gallery paused, eyes drawn to the tension that crackled in the air. All this bravado for what, Susan? A few kind words? Those paintings won't save you from the truth. You're an amateur, Jessica spat, her voice loud enough to ripple through the crowd. Instead of retreating into herself, Susan stood tall, the resolve within her solidifying like the paint that adorned her canvases. You're wrong, Jessica. This isn't about saving face. This is about the freedom of expression. This is about standing firm in my truth and being proud of my journey, regardless of anyone's judgment. Her voice had a strength that surprised even her, empowered by the very stories she had painted. What comes from my heart can never be trivial, and it resonates within those who choose to see beyond a surface, she continued, newfound confidence filling the space between them. Art isn't just a competition, it's a community of shared experiences, and that's what makes it profound. Jessica opened her mouth to retort, but for once her words faltered. The air of superiority she usually exuded dimmed and faltered, echoed by the murmurs of surprise and respect from the crowd surrounding them. Perhaps art doesn't have to parse us into winners or losers, Susan said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. We elevate each other by showcasing our truths, and I plan to illuminate mine unapologetically. As she spoke, she saw a flicker of realization in Jessica's eyes, a crack in the facade of their rivalry, an admission that even the sharpest criticisms often stem from one's own insecurities. Instead of feeling outmatched, Susan experienced a profound sense of empathy. They were both navigating their creative paths, even if they were vastly different. The audience erupted into applause, and Susan felt the adrenaline rush hardening into something else, a solid confidence that blossomed in her chest, unshakably rooted. This was it. She had conquered her fears and transformed them into a platform to speak from. Her narrative was no longer a whispers of doubt, it was a jubilant roar. The remainder of the night surged with possibilities, conversations flowing freely, and the atmosphere shifting into one of warmth and camaraderie. Fellow artists approached her, invigorated by her resilience. With each shared experience, she realized that conflict and challenges had become opportunities for growth, both personally and artistically. In the aftermath of that pivotal moment, Susan felt whole. She had not only transformed her grief into art, but she had also built a bridge from her past insecurities to a future filled with promise and connection to others. In the time that followed, she garnered respect within the art community, receiving recognition for her emotive storytelling through her paintings. There were exhibitions, collaborations, and most importantly, friendships built upon shared vulnerabilities. The journey had taken her from a woman hidden in the shadows of her late husband's legacy to a vibrant artist who reclaimed her voice, an emblem of authenticity and strength. She no longer needed to fear judgment. Instead, she could embrace it as part of her artistic evolution. Each canvas that emerged from her studio served as a monument not just to her struggles, but to her unwavering spirit. She had proven her resilience, cemented her identity, and stepped boldly into an established position as an artist unafraid to dive into the depths of her emotions. Susan reveled in her transformation, a solid confidence radiating from her core as she stepped forward in her art, forever changing the narrative of her life. And for anyone feeling the pangs of doubt or grappling with their identity, she had one vital message: be courageous in the pursuit of your truth, for therein lies immeasurable strength. Now is the time to take action. You need to subscribe now to the channel. Don't let another exclusive emotional story pass you by. Leave a like right now to help our algorithm reach more souls yearning for inspiration. Comment your thoughts, revelations, or theories about Susan's incredible journey. Let's spark a conversation. And share this journey with at least 5 friends who need a reminder that transformation is possible. Don't wait even one more second. These stories can change lives.